Hi, everyone. Welcome to Ad Age Remotely. I'm Janine Poggi, Assistant Managing Editor here at Ad Age. Thanks so much for joining us. And thank you to our sponsor, Verizon Media, for helping to make this episode happen. From Apple to Twitter and now Disney, today I am joined by creative leader Jayanta Jenkins, who is currently leading the Mouse House's agency team that oversees the creative marketing of Disney's branded TV and National Geographic for Disney+. Hi, Jayanta.
Good morning and good afternoon.
How are you? Thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you for having me. Delighted to be here.
We're excited to have you. And for those of you watching at home, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them on our social channels. We will try to get to them during this conversation. So Jayanta, you joined Disney back in December, so not that long ago, still relatively new. Can you talk a little bit about both the personal and the professional draw to an iconic brand like Disney?
The personal draw is Disney has been a part of my life since I was a child, and growing up with that brand and being inspired by that brand and ultimately getting this opportunity, it's definitely a dream come true. And then professionally, I've done a lot of things that feel like they were all just sort of, steps toward this opportunity. And I will say that, over the last 6 months that this role and the team I get to support, it has been life-changing from a career perspective. It has virtually erased what I thought were major accomplishments over the past 15 to 20 years. And again, it feels like everything that I have been doing has really been a build-up to this moment in time. So I'm just extremely grateful to be here right now.
What's it like getting to touch some of the, iconic types of shows, content, characters that, like you said, you grew up with?
It was like the first time I got to meet Prince in person and sit down and chat with him. You revere this place, the IP, the people behind the IP, and then you get an opportunity to get inside and you clearly understand that what's happening internally is why you felt all the things externally and in the content. And on that note, this has been one of the most supportive, collaborative, and really enriching opportunities from a culture perspective here within the company, the Walt Disney Company.
Any favorite IP so far in the first couple of months that you've been most excited to work on, or anything, that you've been especially touched by in terms of, your connection to it?
I'm a new dad, relatively new dad, and my son is 3 years old. So this opportunity has met me exactly where I am as a new father. So a part of what I get to inform is the work that's done for the pre or K or 2 to 5 year olds. And that work is incredibly rewarding. And the approach for me is in that space is like having a conversation with and for my son that the rest of the world gets to listen to. And in terms of the IP, imagine being able to go from the kids space all the way over to the factual based stuff that Nat Geo does and everything in between. So it's very difficult to say there's one singular thing, but I will say again that my life and my experiences and the things that I love are encompassed from end to end on this experience here at Walt Disney.
We are very much in a Disney Junior place with our 2-year-old now. So, I totally can relate to that sentiment.
Yeah.
So Disney recently rejiggered the structure of its marketing teams. Can you talk about that and what it means for how you think about marketing these iconic brands moving forward?
Yeah, we have two powerful and very different and unique teams, and bringing them together, which really is in service of the growth of Disney Plus, has been really interesting and very different for me. And so, the restructuring of that team is to bring together two very strong marketing and comms teams in service of our goals for the service and for our linear networks.
I am here with Jayanta Jenkins from Disney. Thank you so much to those of you who are watching at home. We have Kim from France, Emily from California, Miguel from Arizona, and Lee from Tennessee. Thank you so much for tuning in. And as a reminder, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to post them on our social channels and we will try to get some answers here. So as you're thinking about how you break through the clutter and make an impact in what has become such a cluttered place for content, with the streaming wars that are taking place, with all of the other content that we're seeing emerge, how do you do that? How do you think about that and approach the space?
So many massive opportunities within Walt Disney. And if you think about Walt Disney as a company, it's 100 years old. And it was not born digitally native in the way an Amazon, Netflix, Google, and Apple were. And one of the things that Disney has done very well is storytelling and connected stories that help us see ourselves in culture and it's inspire and help us aspire. And, I would say that the opportunity today is even more interesting because Disney has always utilized technology to connect to consumers. And at the center of Disney's approach has been the IP. And if you think about, there's a very sort of famous flywheel that Walt Disney created back in 1957. And at the center is the studio and the IP, and then around it is the flywheel of distribution through music, comic books, parks, movies at the time. And then there was this emerging technology in the late 50s, I think it was called television. And if you think about where the world was in the late 50s, where radio was a predominant form of how people interacted with content, and what Walt Disney was able to do to, again, extend and distribute its IP and get it in front of the world. And then the advancements in technology were home video. Disney very much optimized for that advance in technology. And then the internet, as it was called in the 1990s. And now to where we are in the streaming and distribution sort of model for what the platforms are utilizing now. Disney has always been able to advantage and sort of utilize technology to continue to distribute its stories. And just recently during the Oscars, Joe Early and Andy Baker put forth a bit of a piece for Disney Plus, and the tagline or the positioning was "The stories continue." And if you think about a streaming service that has the IP catalog that Disney does, and that is a positioning for the streaming service, it's very, very powerful, and it's very true and it's very ownable and authentic to Walt Disney as a company and as a content provider in terms of stories. And go ahead.
I was thinking, as you said that, and you're talking about like the advent of TV and all of that, I'm wondering like what you think the role of then linear live TV is in consumers' lives. Like what role does that play from a brand perspective?
You mean for brands or for?
For as you look at consumer behavior and you think about like the role of TV in that, what is sort of you take away from that?
I mean, television, like linear television is and always will be very important. We have news, which is 24/7. We have events from a sporting perspective, and we have a very leaned-in audience that we get to serve our content to on our linear networks. So I think it's very relevant and still a very important means to get in front of consumers.
What do you think is the biggest challenge in leading the in-house team?
So what is the biggest opportunity in leading the in-house team? I think continuing to optimize for our strengths and advance our practices so we can continue to optimize for the future of our business. And there aren't very many. I do see it as an opportunity and not as a challenge. You have a very connected company like Disney that has so many different places to connect with consumers through parks, through our affiliates. I mean, it is a dream, and I think when I think back to when I was at Wyden Kennedy or at Shide or some of the other places that I've worked, you kind of dream about having access to the things that Disney just has embedded in its sort of arsenal in terms of how you get to connect with consumers and the deep verticals because of the stories and IP. It's literally it's an amazing opportunity. That's all I will say.
So, I mean, let's talk about, you mentioned your time on the agency side. You've obviously been at other iconic brands. Can you talk about maybe the differences between the two of being in-house and also being on the agency side, and maybe some of the lessons that you've learned along the way?
Sure, it's a really great question. I would have to say, in thinking about where I am now versus where I started, there's not a lot of dissimilarities. I spent 7 years at Wieden & Kennedy working on Nike. And Nike is a brand that is connected to culture. So you're always helping advance the conversation and being in the moment. I think the other thing that was really phenomenal about my time at Wieden & Kennedy was how we collaborated and how we had a really great relationship with our partners, with the partners over at Nike. So what I learned there was, one, how to build trust, two, how to think strategically, three, on a year-to-year basis, continue to expand the conversation through whatever, product or brand initiative that we were working on at the time. And it was a similar, continued journey when I got to Chiat to work on Gatorade under Lee Clow and Rob Schwartz and Patrick O'Neill. So, at the center of what I've always got to do is collaborate. I've had longstanding, one-off relationships with big brands. And when I got to go into internal agencies at brands, it was better, because if you think about getting briefed by an agent or by a brand, the moment you walk and go your separate ways, things change. And not because people are indecisive, but because businesses change, things change, timings change, strategy changes or advances or expands. And being within an internal agency gives you access to all of those things in somewhat real time. In the case of Twitter, I was able to, connect with Jack Dorsey regularly. I was able to connect with the CMO, Leslie Berlin, constantly. I was connected to the stakeholders in a very, meaningful way, and taking all those inputs to inform the work collectively and collaboratively and strategically in service of the business objectives. And, the thing that's sort of the thread in between that I won't leave out of the conversation is, how that really made the creative more impactful. And, I think at this point in my career, I take more pride in thinking like a business person and less like the sort of construct of a creative person. And so all of these things have traveled with me that help inform my teams and make me a better leader and think more objectively about the business. And, and I'll pause right here so you can ask more questions. But, I've gotten to a place where I'm less inclined to think about making ads and more inclined to think about growing business. And advertising is very obviously a big part of that.
Yeah, and you mentioned at least several brands that really influence culture. And I'd really like to talk about like what you think, brands' role in culture is, especially post-pandemic. And I want to get to that. We have a very quick message from our sponsor, but we'll get to that when we get back. I'm Janine Poggi here with Jayanta Jenkins of Disney. So we were talking about brands' role in culture, and I'm curious what you think and how that's evolved in a post-pandemic world.
So Brands, roles, and culture. Look, we started this conversation with you asking me, about Disney and how I felt about the opportunity. And one of the first things I said was how influential and informative the brand was in terms of my childhood, and how I began to place myself in the stories and imagine the world through the lens of their content, and place myself as a young little kid in Virginia. Um, Brands like Disney and Nike and a few other of the top brands really do help create the archetype for what people aspire to. And Apple, can't leave Apple out of the conversation. So, and when it comes to storytelling, it becomes even more interesting, if you look at the world that we're in and how we see ourselves. So it when you do it right, you have this string of successes and things that move culture the way Disney has, from Black Panther to Mickey Mouse to the list goes on and on and on and on. And I think as we sort of continue to expand and emerge and hold brands accountable across the board, it's really wonderful to see how brands like Disney and Apple are showing up to help empower us, and not just basically show up as a logo on one's shirt or in one's hand.
Yeah, and I think the idea of empowering us, especially during this time, whether it's during COVID, the social justice movement, those are roles that we are seeing certain brands take more of an active role in doing. I did want to shift gears and talk a little bit about Saturday Morning, the organization that you helped co-found that works to raise awareness and shift perceptions around racial bias and social injustice in the ad world. What has been the focus over the past years? How has that mission evolved, and what have you seen change over the past year?
Well, first, shout out to Jeff Edwards, Keith Cartwright, Kwame Hayford Taylor, and Deja Cox. What up, y'all? Look, that team and the work that we've been doing has been as rewarding as anything I've done in my entire career. And the bond that we have created amongst the five of us and the brands we've got to work with to extend, like you said, the culture, the pro-social conversation around inclusion. Wow, and I'm so glad you brought up Saturday Morning, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk about that. We founded before all of this happened, on the heels of everything that has been happening. And it's been really phenomenal to see brands like IBM, who we're working with now, Procter and Gamble, really take the conversation on and put themselves in a position to bring us together. Specifically, if you think about the work Mark Pritchard's has been doing in Procter and Gamble. So I think, this year for us has been doing more of the work, continuing to have the conversations. In the next couple of weeks, we have a platform that we're launching at Tribeca called 846, where we've got 6 filmmakers to make 6 films that are 8 minutes and 46 seconds in honor of George Floyd. And there's stories that are aspirational and inspirational, and to give back this time in a positive way. So you take these things and they travel with you into the places you get to work. For me, at the moment, it's Disney, and for Jeff, it's Gail, and for Keith, it's at his company Cartwright, and for Kwame, it's at Ken, and for Deja, she just graduated from Georgetown with her master's. And gosh, it's just that work that we're doing and the work that's happening around us on various brands that we aren't even touching continues to be inspiring, meaningful, purposeful, and intentional, and we need more of that always.
Yeah. On a broader level, what are you seeing? What progress have you seen made in diversity and inclusion in the ad world and the ad industry over, the past year? Have you seen any real progress, and in what form?
I have heard a lot of, let me say that differently. I think there's a lot of meaningful intention, but you can only judge an agency or a brand through their behavior and being consistent.
Mm.
So I kind of, on the outset of the conversation from a year ago, I'm very honored and proud to be a part of a company that is really taking on the conversation and continue to do things in a very meaningful way. I think Mark Pritchard at Procter and Gamble, similarly. I think the advertising world still has a long ways to go, if I'm honest. I think a lot of meaningful conversations were started. And then, I think it's back to business as usual. And I don't mean to be critical. I have no, biases against the agency world. But, I think the opportunities from a leadership perspective in terms of the work that is being put into the world by the agencies who aren't inclusive and diverse enough continues to shine a light on the opportunities to be consistent, to strengthen, and to show up and be purposeful and do what you say. I have a lot of friends who are at agencies that are having the same problems a year later that they had 10 years ago. So, there's still a lot of work to do.
How do you think the industry needs to be held accountable?
That is a question I wish I could answer in a meaningful way, because it's, I think I've had great conversations with people who want to do the right things, but there is a talent resource issue or a talent pipeline issue. So, people like myself, like Jeff, and a lot of others, we're continuing to do things to create the right pipeline to get people into agencies, and so we have the right people who have line of sight to the opportunities. Advertising and marketing are two of the most amazing professions imaginable. I've got to live. I wasn't expecting to get choked up on that, but I've been able to really live my dreams through my profession. As a human being and as an African American male, and everyone should experience across the board what I'm experiencing. It has not been easy, but I don't think it's easy for anyone. But I think what I would say is continued diligence in wanting to bring in people, being vulnerable, being willing to have open conversations, being willing to admit when you're wrong, and just admit it. And I think that's a strong place of being able to begin to expand the conversation. And I think one of the things that's important for all companies, all brands, all individuals, it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to fail, as long as you learn from that and hold yourself accountable and vision a world where celebrating our similarities becomes the way that we begin to heal our differences and create and strengthen our approaches for the future. Like I said earlier, I have a 3-year-old son, and one of the most meaningful things for me being at the Walt Disney Company, working amongst my teams, is knowing that I'm getting to be a part of the conversation that will inform the IP that he gets to see and grow up with. At 3 years old, he already knows Minnie Mouse and Spidey and Prince. But, I think what I'm getting at is, I'm getting to be a part of conversation that's creating the work that's going to build and strengthen how we look at each other and celebrate how we show up culturally and globally. And it's an honor. And I wish that for the advertising agency business. I wish that for everyone. And all of the agencies that are watching this right now, I wish for everyone to get an opportunity to know that what you're doing is actually impacting the world. And it doesn't have to be a Disney. And the work that we're doing is important. So if it's small or large, whatever the scale, everything matters. And who is in the room helping inform that matters. It does.
What if we, sit down next year and sort of have this conversation? What do you hope is different about it? What do you hope you actually see that's meaningful change?
Well, from my perspective, with the teams that I'm with, we're going to continue to do the work and do things that are purposeful and intentional, and grow and connect with people, with consumers meaningfully. That is, again, the what's beautiful about getting to do what I'm doing, where I'm doing it. For the rest of the industry, a year from now, let's look back at the work that we've put into the world, and it doesn't have to be award winning. Let's really discuss how it made a difference, who it empowered, what communities it supported, what talent we brought in for the first time to give an opportunity to that never thought they would be considered for a role like a head of marketing at a big company, to lead a very amazing but complex but awesome team, and give people the opportunities to fail, give people the opportunities to succeed, give your organizations the cultural benefit of different points of view. It's just going to strengthen things.
Jayanta, thank you so much for joining us. It was great to have you on. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to our sponsor, Verizon Media. And as always, thank you to our Ad Age crew, Alfred Mascaroni, Anna Sakula, Max Sternlicht, and Ariel Breck for making this live stream happen. And thank you for those of you tuning in.